September 480 BC. Athens. The Acropolis is on fire. Not smoke, not embers. The wooden roof beams of the Erechtheion are fully alight, and a column of black smoke rising above the citadel is visible from the sea, from the island of Salamis, where the entire Greek fleet sits anchored and watches. You are standing in the Kerameikos district. Persian infantry are moving up the street. Behind you, a locked house. Ahead, soldiers. No boat. No father. He died at Thermopylae 3 weeks ago. You have his name. Nothing else. Xerxes, King of Kings, Lord of 28 nations, has just ordered the erasure of Athens. The fleet watched, but no historian ever fully reported what Persian soldiers found when they moved through those streets. What they took, what they filed. Here is what Xerxes did not do. He did not slaughter the civilian women of Athens. Slaughter would have been inefficient. The Achaemenid Empire was not a conquering horde. It was the most sophisticated administrative apparatus the ancient world had ever produced. 28 subject nations, 127 provinces, a palace complex at Persepolis staffed by scribes who tracked every ration, every laborer, every woman by geographic origin and labor classification. When Persian commanders seized Greek women during the 480 BC campaign, they did not improvise. They executed a protocol that predated the war by decades. Herodotus documents the seizures. So does the physical record at Persepolis. Greek women, particularly those of strategos and archon class, identifiable by the quality of their clothing, their silver jewelry, the craftsmanship of their sandals, were separated from lower status civilians during military sweeps. Not killed, not chained in a public square. Inventoried. The commanders had categories. They had quotas. They had a destination already carved in stone 1,400 miles east, where pomegranates were etched into every column, and a walled complex larger than the Athenian agora waited for new arrivals from the latest campaign. Before we go further, if you've never heard this history, that is not an accident. Subscribe, because what comes next is not in any textbook, and the evidence has been sitting in a basement in Chicago for 90 years waiting for someone to read out loud. The soldiers were organized, methodical. They moved through the Kerameikos district, through the agora, through the wealthier neighborhoods, climbing toward the Acropolis. They were looking for specific women. Women who wore a particular kind of fabric. Women whose hands showed no calluses from field labor. Women whose fathers had commanded triremes. She fit every criterion. No violence necessary. The protocol didn't require it. She was escorted, not dragged, not beaten, to a holding assembly point near the city's eastern gate. Around her, other women, some weeping, some silent, some wearing expressions she did not have a word for yet, though she would learn one in Elamite before the year was out. The soldiers gave them water. That was the first disorienting detail. The soldiers gave them water. This was not mercy. This was logistics. A damaged asset has reduced value. The protocol accounted for that too. She did not know where they were going. She knew the smoke was still rising behind her. She knew the fleet at Salamis had not moved. She knew her father's name, and her mother's name, and the name of every street in the Kerameikos. She would need to hold those names carefully, because the system she was about to enter had a specific, documented mechanism for dissolving exactly that kind of knowledge. And it was extraordinarily good at its work. The Oriental Institute, University of Chicago, holds 30,000 clay tablets in climate-controlled storage, excavated from Persepolis, 1933 and 1934. Most scholars who first examined them catalog them as grain receipts. They're grain receipts. They're also a registry of human beings processed like grain. Scholars Richard Hullock and later historian Maria Brocius identified something embedded in the administrative language. Entries listing women workers, cordas, organized not by name, but by province of origin. Ionia, Lydia, Scudera, which is Thrace. The women received ration allocations in silver or measured grain, assigned according to a 4-tier classification system. Tier 1, skilled women. Higher rations, better quarters. Tier 4, Newly arrived women from active conquest territories. Minimum rations. No names. Origin code only. Read that again. No names. Origin code only. The tablets do not use the word slave. The Achaemenid system almost never did. The administrative language ran on euphemisms: dependent worker, ration recipient, palace woman. Bureaucratic terminology engineered to convert a human being into a line item entry without ever requiring the scribes to acknowledge what they were actually recording. Greek noblewomen, daughters of the men who commanded triremes at Salamis, entered Persepolis and were assigned a number. Their Greek names were transliterated into Elamite cuneiform. Then, within one administrative cycle, replaced entirely by a functional designation. In tablets dated after 479 BC, women from Attica appear. They carry Persian classifications. Their origin code is the only residue of who they were before. The king's harem was not a room, not a chamber, not a wing of a palace. It was a separate walled city with its own internal economy, and Xerxes ran it exactly the way he ran his empire, through total, documented, administrative control. She arrived in spring, 479 BC. The Takara, the harem complex at Persepolis, covered more ground than the entire Athenian agora. Stone walls, 4 meters thick, one entrance, one guarded gate. Inside, women from Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, Ionia, Thrace. A population pulled from every edge of the known world, sorted by origin, assigned by function. No chains. That was the second disorienting detail. No chains, no visible guards inside the quarters, no public beatings. Instead, food, clean water, oil for the skin, wool for cold nights. She was given a room with other Ionian origin women. She was assigned a eunuch administrator. She was handed a ration allocation within 48 hours of arrival. She was given pomegranate. She stared at it. It was the first Persian object placed directly in her hands. She ate it because she had not eaten in 2 days. The seeds were the color of garnets. The juice stained her fingers. She wiped them on the stone floor and said nothing. The eunuchs are documented in the tablets. Their names survive. The women they process do not. The administrators are history. The administered are silence. She had been educated. She could read. She understood governance. She had listened to her father debate naval strategy at symposia since she was 12 years old. She understood, within the first week, the precise architecture of what had been done to her. She understood it completely. She understood it the way you understand the dimensions of a room after the door has been locked from the outside. She was not being punished. She was being managed. And somewhere in the eastern wing of the same complex, another Greek woman, one who had arrived 2 years earlier during the Ionian campaign, had stopped speaking Greek entirely. Not because anyone had ordered her to stop, because she had decided it was safer. Stop, because this is where every documentary about Xerxes gets it wrong. Every film, every lecture series, every History Channel segment that opens with a map of the Persian Empire and closes with Thermopylae. The default framework is captivity, women taken, women imprisoned, women suffering passively inside stone walls until history rescues them or forgets them. That framework is not inaccurate. It is catastrophically incomplete. And it is incomplete in a specific direction because Western scholars kept searching for chains and found administration instead and made the mistake of calling administration benign. It was not benign. It was total. Historian Maria Brocius, in Women in Ancient Persia, documents what the tablets actually show when you read them as a behavioral system rather than an inventory list. Harem women in the Persepolis complex were not passive. They were active participants in their own psychological restructuring because the system was specifically engineered to make resistance the irrational choice. Women who assimilated received higher ration tiers, better quarters, gifts of silver recorded in the administrative logs. Women who bore children to Persian nobles of sufficient rank received documented land grants. The system did not threaten. It did not need to. It simply made Greek identity progressively, measurably, mathematically more expensive to maintain than Persian identity. Every day, She held on to her father's name. She ate one tier of rations. Every day, she answered to her Elamite designation without correction. Her tier held steady or climbed. The system did not break people. It repriced them. And here is the specific cruelty reserved for Greek noble women in particular. The detail that Brocius identifies and that almost no popular history has ever touched. Greek female culture had a word for the ideal woman: sophrosyne, silence, domestic propriety, obedience to the household structure, invisibility in public contexts. That was the Greek feminine ideal, and it was identical, point for point, to the behavioral profile the Persian harem rewarded. The cage did not need to be forced onto these women. It had been pre-fitted by Athens, by their own fathers. The Achaemenid system simply relocated the cage to a different address and kept the same locks. That is not captivity. That is something far more deliberate. But the system had one structural flaw it could not engineer away. It produced witnesses, women who had been inside long enough to understand the machinery from the inside, who had watched it work on themselves and on others, and who made a decision about what to do with that knowledge. One of them, referenced in a secondary Herodotian source, chose to speak. Amestris, queen of Persia, wife of Xerxes, mother of Artaxerxes. She is one of the most documented women in Achaemenid history and one of the most deliberately misclassified. Herodotus describes her in Book 9 doing something that commentators have spent 2,000 years filing under jealousy. She ordered the mutilation of a Persian noblewoman she suspected of involvement with Xerxes. Hands removed, nose removed, ears, lips, breasts, severed and sent back to the woman's husband in a cloth. Herodotus records it as a domestic dispute. It was not a domestic dispute. It was a queen enforcing the structural boundary of a state institution. Amestris understood, with complete clarity, that the harem system's stability depended on absolute hierarchy, and that hierarchy depended on consequences being visible, physical, and irreversible. The mutilation was not an act of jealousy. It was an administrative communication sent in human flesh to every woman inside the complex and every Persian noble outside it. The message was not "he is mine." The message was, the boundary is real, and I am the boundary's enforcement mechanism. She visited Persepolis during the exact period 480 to 478 BC, when Greek women from the Athens campaign were being processed into the system. The tablets do not record her interactions with specific captives, but Herodotus confirms in Book 7 that women seized in conquest were distributed as royal gifts at the king's discretion. Amestris requested specific women from the Greek intake. She received them. What she did with them exists in no administrative record, because Persian queens did not document what happened to gifts. Xerxes ordered the burning of Athens. His name is on the war. But it was Amestris who decided, personally, which Greek women survived long enough to disappear quietly into the system, and which ones did not survive that decision at all. For years inside Persepolis, her ration tier has increased twice. She no longer requires a translator for administrative exchanges. She has learned enough Elamite to respond to the eunuch scribes directly, the correct deferential register, the proper verbal markers indicating her functional designation. She learned it the same way she learned everything, by watching what happened to women who didn't. She has been reassigned to the textile workshop. This is documented in the tablets. Not her specifically, but the pattern is explicit. Women with Greek origin codes appear in the Persepolis weaving records at a disproportionate rate compared to other provincial groups. Attica had the finest textile tradition in the Aegean. The administrators knew this. They allocated accordingly. She produces cloth for the palace. High-quality work. Her output is logged. Her name is not. She still knows her father's name. She repeats it at night, quietly. The syllables in Attic Greek, the specific stops and aspirated consonants of the dialect she grew up speaking, are getting harder to produce accurately. The throat forgets. The tongue forgets. Not because anyone ordered her to forget, because Elamite uses different muscles, different placements, and she's been speaking Elamite for 4 years in Greek for almost none of that time. Language erasure is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is the slowest amputation in the human experience, the kind where the limb is gone before the pain registers. The other Attic women are no longer near her. This is also documented. The tablet records show origin group women from the same territory systematically distributed across different workshop assignments within 12 to 18 months of arrival. Not randomly. The spacing is too consistent for randomness. Someone made a deliberate administrative decision to prevent Greek women from clustering, from forming a linguistic community that might sustain a shared identity across years. Isolation was not a side effect of the system. It was a design specification. The pomegranate has been on her ration list for 2 years. She no longer registers that it is a Persian fruit. She had one thing left, one thing the system had not yet fully processed. Not her name. That was already transliterated, already functionally replaced. Not her language. That was eroding syllable by syllable in the dark. Something smaller. Something the tablets could not measure or allocate or reassign. She remembered the specific quality of morning light over the Saronic Gulf as seen from the Kerameikos. The exact angle of it. The color of the water at that hour. She held that image with both hands, because it was the last purely Greek thing she possessed. 465 BC. The bedchamber of Xerxes I. Persepolis. A blade. A trusted commander named Artabanus. The probable complicity of the king's own son. Xerxes I, king of kings, architect of the administrative system that had absorbed her and hundreds like her, was assassinated in the dark in his own palace by men who had eaten at his table. The palace did not collapse. The tablets kept being written. Ration distributions continued without interruption. The harem, every woman inside it, every functional designation, every origin code, was inherited by Artaxerxes I, who had never met most of them and did not need to. They were state property. They transferred with the throne the way granaries transfer with conquered territory. Automatically, completely, without ceremony. For women who had been in the system since 480 BC, this was year 15. They were in their 30s now. They had outlived the man who captured them. They had not outlived the institution that processed them, because the Achaemenid harem was never a personal institution. It was a state institution wearing the costume of a personal one. Xerxes' death changed nothing structurally. The pomegranates were still delivered. The ration tiers still held. And then, 449 BC, the Peace of Callias, diplomatic exchange between Athens and Persia, formal negotiations, the war technically ending. Greek informants who had operated inside Persian territory during the intervening decades brought Herodotus fragments of information he recorded in the 440s. Fragmentary, secondhand, but specific enough to matter. Some Greek women, a documented subset, not all, not most, but some, were given the option to return to Athens during the diplomatic exchanges following Callias. They had been in Persepolis for 30 years. Some of them declined. Herodotus records the reason without commentary, which is almost more devastating than if he had editorialized. They declined because they had children in Persia, children who spoke Persian, children who had Persian fathers, Persian designations, Persian futures. Returning to Athens meant returning without them, because Persian law did not release children of the palace system with their mothers. The system had worked. The pomegranate had been eaten for 15 years, then 20, then 30. The fruit was long gone. What remained was the stain, indelible, generational, permanent. The highest horror in this story is not captivity. Captivity can be named, mourned, avenged. The highest horror is attachment, the slow, chemically inevitable process by which the system made itself indispensable to the people it had consumed. Some came home, some stayed, and for the ones who came home, Athens was waiting with a different kind of erasure, sharpened and ready. Greek law did not hesitate. Women who had lived inside Persian households, regardless of how they arrived there, regardless of consent, regardless of the 30 years of administrative machinery that had processed them into that position, were classified under Athenian legal code as moikiai, women who had been with another man. The law did not ask how. The law did not distinguish between a woman who walked willingly into a Persian bed and a woman who was inventoried at a military checkpoint in the burning Karameikos district at 17 years old with no boat, no guardian, and no options. The legal category was the same. The civic consequence was identical. Stripped of full status. Permanently reduced. Their children, the ones they brought back, the few who were permitted to leave Persia, were not eligible for Athenian citizenship under Pericles' citizenship law of 451 BC. That law required both parents to be Athenian citizens of documented lineage. Children born in Persia to Greek mothers and Persian fathers were legally non-existent in Athens. Ghosts with Greek faces. They could walk the streets of the city their grandmothers had been evacuated from. They could not vote, own certain property, or hold civic office. Note the timing. The Peace of Callias, 449 BC. Pericles' citizenship law, 451 BC. Passed 2 years before the diplomatic exchanges that would bring some of these women home. The law that erased their children was already in place before the children arrived. Athens did not react to the returnees. Athens had prepared for them. The Parthenon's construction began 447 BC. On the same Acropolis Xerxes burned. The friezes carved into its exterior depicted Persian warriors defeated, Greek heroes triumphant, the gods of Olympus intervening on behalf of civilization against barbarism. It is one of the most celebrated artistic achievements in human history. The women who returned from Persia are not depicted anywhere on it. They were handed their Greek identity back in a legally diminished form, told to be grateful for the restoration of a city they had never stopped belonging to, and expected to be silent. Sophrosine. Again. Still. Different city. Same instruction. The ones who stayed in Persia do not appear in Greek records at all. They exist only in the Persepolis tablets, and only until those tablets stop. The administrative record from Persepolis ended abruptly in 458 BC. No explanation in the archaeological record. No closing entries. No transfer documentation. No death registers. The women recorded in them, hundreds of entries, dozens carrying Greek origin codes, simply ceased to be documented. The ration lists stopped mid-allocation. The scribes were writing one day and not the next. That is the Achaemenid system's final administrative act. It did not record endings. It recorded only as long as the resource was being actively allocated. When the allocation stopped, the record stopped. The woman did not receive a closing entry. She received silence. The same silence she entered the system with, just filed under a different number. Both empires erased them. Persia used bureaucracy. Athens used law. The tools were different. The outcome was the same woman, standing in the same erasure, with the same absence where her name should be. The Parthenon still stands. You could buy a photograph of it at 600 airports in 90 countries. It appears on currency, on textbook covers, on the opening frames of documentaries about the birth of democracy. It is the founding image of Western civilization. The monument Athens built on the ashes of what Xerxes burned, the physical argument that civilization survived and barbarism failed. The Persepolis tablets sit 40 feet underground in acid-free archival storage at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. 30,000 of them, most still untranslated. Access available to credentialed specialists who submit formal requests weeks in advance. The women with Greek origin codes embedded in those tablets have been identified and written about by 3 scholars over the past 4 decades. None of those findings appear in a standard history curriculum. One reached a footnote in a specialized academic volume with a print run of 800 copies. History did not suppress this story through conspiracy. There was no coordinated silence, no deliberate cover-up, no powerful institution that ordered these women removed from the record. History suppressed it through categorization. The Greek women became an administrative subcategory inside a Persian economic archive. The archive was buried under a collapsed palace for 2,400 years. When archaeologists excavated it in 1933, they correctly identified it as an economic archive and allocated their resources toward the throne room, the royal tombs, the Apadana staircase with its carved procession of tribute bearers. The tablets went to Chicago. The scholars who studied them were economists of the ancient world, not historians of gender. The women in the records were data points in a labor study. The study was published. The women remained data points. Xerxes did not need to kill Greek women to destroy them. He had a system that could receive a person, her language, her name, her legal identity, her children, her memory of morning light over the Saronic Gulf, and process every element of her until nothing remained except a ration receipt and an origin code. The receipt is still in Chicago. The origin code is still legible. The woman is the silence between the numbers, a silence so complete, so administratively thorough, that it took 90 years after the tablets were excavated for anyone to read it as a wound. The pomegranate carved above the eastern staircase at Persepolis is still visible. Tourists photograph it every day. They do not know what it was rationed for. They did not know what it meant to eat it for 15 years and stop remembering what fruit tasted like before. She held the light over the Saronic Gulf as long as she could. We don't know how long that was. We don't know her name. If this history disturbed you, it should. Subscribe, because next we go inside the fate of the men Xerxes kept alive after the Greek campaigns. A calculation even colder than this one, documented in the same tablets, hidden in the same archive, and ignored for the same reason. The receipts exist. Someone just has to read them.